This program is brought to you by Globus.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of your informative and discursive program. It is the Global Insider on your Pan African television. Today, we continue to look at war, understanding its tactics, of course, and our focus it's on the Ukraine crisis, where we are asking the question if diplomacy can still sustain or succeed if with the recent escalation, of course, with the arms or Western arms circulation that actually was reported recently following the attack by the Kyiv government in Luhansk region, particularly touching the vocational training school and girls maybe dormitory, and also the attack on St. Petersburg at the time that the region was hosting the International Economic Forum. So, with this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to understand again war theories and, of course, the tactics. Should we call this some sort of escalation or probably a pressure that wants to put the Kremlin into reacting fiercely to put the world in an era of a full-blown war. Of course, that is the analysis, or probably those are some viewpoints, opinions presented by pundits analyzing the latest flare regarding the Ukraine crisis that moved actually to having, drones and missiles attack on territories that are not a call for concern. At this juncture, we want to ask these very pertinent questions as to how the conflict or the special military operation that started in 2022 is actually spiraling, and then can diplomacy still thrive at this juncture, or probably we are going to see some sort of a full blown escalation that would change the course of the event, ladies and gentlemen. Just to note that this is a program that will run for 2 hours, and with a panel of experts, we're going to discover from the discussion the real stakes on the ground at this juncture. And we also seen the theories of war propounded by some of the war theories, including Saint Augustine and, of course, Thomas Aquinas, among others, presenting war as some sort of a political agenda or a tool to attain some sort of political gains is in line with policy change. And that is how we understand moving from classical to a guerrilla warfare and even hybrid warfare, which is something that is very common in today's Ukraine proxy war, ladies and gentlemen. Without much ado, it is time for us to uncover the panel this day, and I'm glad to welcome Christian Yet, who is, of course, a war reporter having a first-hand, interpretation of the realities of war in the Donbass, particularly in the Donetsk region. She also doubles as a deputy editor-in-chief international reporters. A pleasure having you this day, dear Niet, to actually analyze in total the recent development pertaining the Ukraine crisis and the extended agenda that this presents to us.
Thanks for the invitation.
And thank you also for giving importance to this invitation as we continue to seek to understand the stakes on the ground and what this seeks to attain. And let's move now to Brazil. For the first time, we want to welcome Professor Richard Santos, Chief of Staff, SEPROMI, and of course, Media and Global Power Dynamics. It's a pleasure welcoming you this day on this platform, Global Insight, proposed to you by Globus.
Okay, thank you for the invitation.
Looking forward to having a constructive conversation with you. We stay in Brazil, welcoming Leonardo Sobreira, a journalist and also editor at Brazil 247. And also to note that he is very much into public policy and global policy dynamics. It's a pleasure welcoming you for the first time on this platform, dear Leonardo.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's, if everything okay with Professor Maurice Okoli, he's Institute for Africa Studies and, of course, Institute of World Economic and International Studies. You're welcome to today's discussion, Professor Maurice Okoli.
Thank you for having me in this program.
Always a pleasure. And Arnold Doubly, of course, he is an international lawyer who doubles as a political consultant and also a human rights defender. It's a pleasure having you on this very timely and utmost program, dear Arnold.
Hello, Clarence. Hello, everybody. Hope to have a great conversation as usual.
Absolutely. Hopefully, we're having a great conversation to be able to ascertain the real stakes on the ground. I will start off with you, dear Arnold, getting the general interpretation or the holistic interpretations of the latest events that happened in Russia and Ukraine in line with the crisis. Here we're talking about attacks that directly touch the civilians. We're talking the Luhansk region. We're also looking at the attack in St. Petersburg, only as the region or the town was hosting the International Economic Forum. And after that, we see Zelensky sending out a message to the Russian Federation President Vladimir Putin, calling for a one-on-one talk to try to settle the flare. So let's understand the logic behind the recent drastic moves and then the call for dialogue.
Well, I think we're dealing with a very sick, perverted person in Kiev, to be sure. It would not come to anybody's mind after the events that you've mentioned for him to send a letter which obviously was going to be discussed within the realm of questions that were being asked to the Russian president during the plenary sessions. Except that, again, this has no bearing. This letter has no point in being into existence, I would say, in the wake of those infamous attacks on civilians. But to your first questions, obviously we are dealing with a terrorist regime. This has been going on quasi since the start of the conflict. We don't have to go back that far. If we recall what happened during the numerous attacks on the Kerch Bridge in Crimea back in October 8th, 2022 already. We recall also the infamous attack on the Crocus City Hall Center. And we know that this is a regime that does not abide by the laws of war and which aims to inflict maximum damage through the terrorizing of civilians with the hope that those very civilians would over time turn against their own government. It's a very simple, plain explanation to what we're dealing with here. And now that the war is evolving from the mere attrition rate that we've been seeing to somewhat of a war using drones, and we know now that Ukraine, thanks to the collective West, and more specifically to the Europeans who are pitching in, Kiev is able to manufacture, so they say 1 million drones. We'll not get into the veracity of this number, but suffice it to say that they are now banking on attacks deep into Russian territories on civilian targets. Yes, the idea is to try to goad the Russian Federation in reacting in such a way that it is hoped in Kiev Article 5 could be invoked. Let's recall that many of those drones are flying over the Baltic countries' airspace, so they are perfectly aware of it. It would be easy for them to pick up the telephone and warn their counterpart in Moscow that drones are flying their ways. They are not doing so. I would add to this that the recent burial of an infamous Nazi collaborator really leaves no room in thinking that Kiev, is nothing else than a literally terroristic Nazi regime right in the center of Europe. So it will now remain to be seen what Moscow will do. Obviously, we saw Vladimir Putin's reaction to that so-called letter, which was an insult to the Russian people, when he said essentially that, one, there is no point in meeting unless there are long-term discussions bearing on the resolving the conflict. That's pretty obvious. But second of all, this showed Vladimir Putin's disdain for this would-be president of Ukraine. And when he said "Rabote, comrade," it means basically just finish him off. That's where we are now.
Absolutely, and we continue to watch how events unfold and the way forward or the course of that the war will be taken given the latest flare. In the same perspective, we meet you, dear Christian, yet looking at the conceptual interpretation of our topic, because we are highlighting very key terms: Western arms, escalation, and of course asking this very important question: if diplomacy can still sustain with this latest flare that seems to be intentionally giving a different course of the war, with the proxy tendencies and involvement that have heightened in recent days.
What is really interesting is that this letter, this open letter from Zelensky, was published in two languages, Ukrainian and English. If really this open letter is targeted to the Russian president, it should be written in Russian. Why is it written in Ukrainian? The Russian president doesn't read or doesn't speak Ukrainian. English is also not the mother tongue of Vladimir Putin. So why writing it into languages which are not languages he speaks currently or fluently, and which are not native language? That's the first point. The second point, the terms of this letter, it's clearly an attempt to make a Minsk agreement number 3. Why? Because clearly Zelensky asked for a full, complete ceasefire during the whole time of the negotiations. It reminds me exactly the same terms of the Minsk Agreement 1 and 2 that Ukraine was not able to fulfill. So why do we have to give them a third chance? Because we understand well the situation of the Ukrainian army is very bad. They lose a lot of men. Even with the Busification, they are not succeeding, like feeling completely all the losses they have. And I count in the losses everything. So the people who desert, the deserters, the people who die, the severely injured who cannot go back on the front line, and the guy who are taken prisoners. So as Vladimir Putin said during the last year, the size of the Ukrainian army has begun to shrink because the number of mobilized men is not sufficient to compensate. So this letter from Zelensky is clearly an attempt to buy time, like Angela Merkel said, and how François Hollande said. The Minsk agreements were a way to buy time for Ukraine to reinforce its army, and it's exactly what he wants. because for the moment his army is in a very bad situation. Clearly, there are cracks in some parts of the front. The Russian army is advancing almost everywhere, and so it's a pitiful attempt to present like, oh, we try to make peace, but you see the Russian side doesn't want. But we have given to this already two times Minsk agreement first and second. Why do we have to try a third time? They will delay the negotiation for months, if not for years. I remind you, the Minsk agreement number 2, it was like 7 years until the special military operation began. So 7 years of completely useless negotiations. So why do we have to fall on the same trap? And that's what Vladimir Putin answered. He said, I don't see the interest in that. We have already done that many times. So Russia said there will be no ceasefire during the negotiations. If you want to sit on the negotiation table, we sit, we discuss. But there will be no ceasefire to allow you to reinforce your army, to have more time to train the mobilized men. And then, of course, the plan is after to go to a counteroffensive like they did in 2023.
Yeah.
So I don't see any point in this. For the moment, the diplomacy is in complete stalemate, and it will stay in the same situation until Ukraine is in a very, very desperate situation.
Indeed, of course, it is imperative that the very objective of the special military operation comes to the fore to see how this can be done. But then, how can we attain this with some sort of the realities of greater power politics? And this brings us to that juncture where we say that the inherent uncertainty of war has crowded the special military operation or the proxy war ongoing there. And on this juncture, we want to get the interpretation of the recent attacks or events from you, Leonardo Sabrera, who of course is very much involved in on how a great power politics work and how this relates to the philosophy of war.
Thank you. Thank you. I much appreciate what both speakers previously, Arnaud and Crystal, have mentioned. However, I would just like to push back a little bit in pertaining to this idea of great power politics and recognizing the situation that we have currently. It is clear that, as Zelensky has said, Trump is indeed too much focused on Iran. We have the idea, the notion that negotiations are happening, that the conflict might cease, though we don't know. So it is likely that at least until for some time, we may have that uncertainty still, and the possibility of that conflict in the Middle East escalating into levels that are actually much more pertaining to the U.S. national interest than Ukraine is, for example. So when we talk about the disruptions in global trade, in oil markets, and everything that comes through the Strait of Hormuz. So that situation is real. It is a real worry for Donald Trump because it is also causing internal problems at a time when we have, of course, midterm elections. So in that aspect, we might have a window of opportunity if the interests are indeed for that, for potential deal involving a ceasefire, and it's crucial as well that we don't have the details precisely as Christel was outlining a little bit of what was published, this idea of a ceasefire, but nothing else. We know of the questions that really have somehow prevented a deal from happening in the past, the recognition of the regions that Russia has taken over in Ukraine, and a series of other demands as well that weren't accepted by Ukraine. But if we are to believe in this letter, which is still unprecedented, we have not actually seen, if I'm not mistaken, such a public call for direct negotiations between both presidents. So if we are to believe that this is somehow a little bit more aligned with the current situation, then there might be really a window of opportunity here for something to be signed. Of course, that again, that is not clear exactly what is going to happen. And there's also the main um, uh, counteracting factor, perhaps, to this whole situation is perhaps a misconception as to it's analyzed. And perhaps we are to blame for this, the whole media is to blame for this, and is simply treating this conflict as a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Clearly, the situation isn't that anymore.
Absolutely.
So just a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, we saw in the news that car manufacturers in Europe, big car manufacturers in Europe, are actually converting their whole industrial processes to build military equipment, things like tanks and drones, tanks in the case of Volkswagen, I believe, and Renault somehow is also producing drones and not exactly in coordination with Ukraine, but when we take into account the deals that exist, of course, that is going to end up there. So what I'm saying is that this has acquired a different nature, which is that NATO is actually pushing for this, doesn't really have an interest in making this conflict a solution for this conflict in a peaceful way. And it seems to be banking on the idea, actually, of a perpetuation of a war that they somehow can win against Russia, because when you have the whole industrial complex in Europe suddenly becoming a military site as well, of course that creates new dangers. But the main point is that this points to a situation where this conflict is actually moving on and on and on until something else happens. And that seems to me the main worry behind this idea that now is the correct time for a conflict. And as was mentioned before, just to finish it off over here, the recent attacks on SPIF, of course, Ukraine has been engaging in such attacks ever since this conflict has started. Really, I have had the opportunity to visit Russia a couple of times over the past, say, 4 years. I've been there, I'd say, about 5 times. The most recent one last year, and it has just been kind of part of the routine. Of course, I'm not constantly there to attest to that, but every time I was there, you'd have such attacks that, even though they cause limited damage, it is always a damage, but not to the point where Ukraine can actually believe that such little attacks are going to revert the situation within Russia in any way.
And of course, that you quite mentioned something, because when we're looking at some the war theories or philosophies, we begin to understand where the place of hybrid warfare comes in, and how it helps to change the situation on the ground. I come to you, Professor Richard, just to align with what Leonardo said. We are looking at this hybrid warfare that is trying to change the course of the war on the ground. With the recent attacks from Ukraine, the whole lot of information flooded the internet, and of course some declaring probably the defeat of Russia by the Kyiv government, and a whole lot of other information circulated. So we want to understand such a narrative of hybrid warfare, especially in media relations, and how this helps to change the pattern or course of such a sensitive war, like has been highlighted. It's not just some sort of a crisis between Russia and Ukraine, but then we're looking at the greater picture, especially with Western involvement and how policy dynamics can be affected by those.
Yeah, thanks for asking this for me. First of all, I agree with my colleagues. I share many of the observations made by my colleagues. However, I'd like that to note that this conflict shouldn't be viewed solely through as military lens. It is also a development issue, a diplomatic issue, and a global issue, global south issue with significant consequence for countries far beyond Europe. From this perspective, the war in Ukraine is not only a European issue, it's a global issue. Its consequences affect food security, energy, markets, economic stability, diplomatic relations, and developing prospects across Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, and much of the global south. Ukraine is in a dead end, as we would say in Brazil. Zelensky's recent moves and proposals seem to reflect that reality. From my perspective, the actor that has benefited most from this conflict is the United States, particularly through the expansion of arms sales and the strengthening of its strategic influence in Europe. However, time is no longer on Ukraine's side. The challenge now is to navigate and manage the realpolitik established by Putin, recognizing the realities on the ground while seeking a diplomatic path that can prevent further destruction and human suffering. At the same time, this conflict raises broader questions about the future of international relations. Are we moving toward a more multipolar world? Can diplomacy still overcome military escalation? What role should emerging nations play in building peace? It's important to think. And how can regions such as Africa, Caribbean, and Latin America strengthen their voice in global governance by social media, TV, and industry communication? As someone engaged in contemporary Pan-African debates, I had the honor of participation in the 9th Pan-African Congress passed in Lomé, Togo, a landmark gateway that reaffirmed Africa's growing role in shaping the emerging multipolar world. Following that experience, we are currently organizing an international meeting in Bahia, Brazil, scheduled for August to debate the communication crisis, the war crisis, not just in Ukraine, but like in Palestine, here in Latin America too. It's dedicated to strengthening cooperation between Africa and its global diaspora through discussion on culture, diplomacy, development, and reparation. This experience reinforced my understanding that Africa and Global South is no longer merely reacting to global events. It's increasingly acting as a strategic geopolitical actor, pursuing sovereignty, regional integration, economic transformation, and a greater voice in international affairs. But it's not possible if he didn't have independent journalists, if he didn't have independent debates like that.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Richard. And this first segment, we round off with you, Professor Maurice Okoli. Our preamble highlighted, a new turn of events, especially with, flow of arms particularly from the Western arms, noted the United Kingdom and even the United States of America, according to reports that statistics gathered from the latest attacks by Kyiv that reached the Luhansk People's Republic and also St. Petersburg. So the concept of this escalation or probably Western flow of arms, in your own perspective, holistically, how do you see this affecting the present status quo of the crisis at this juncture? Will it lead to room for dialogue or probably for more antagonism and retaliation among the parties involved?
Hello?
Hello, Professor Maurice. We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let us first of all admit the reality of war. Let us admit that war is terrible, that war is horrible. It brings about immense suffering, destruction. It brings about physical and emotional trauma. And the trauma of war lasts for generations. I have no doubt that this war between Russia and Ukraine, the trauma is going to last for generations. At this juncture, please permit me, for the interest of our viewers and all of us here, and on behalf of us here, to extend our deepest condolences to the people of Ukraine, to the Russians, for the tragedy that has befallen on this country. Let's say that as the war is going on, it's very, very pertinent for us to know that the sufferings and destructions and loss of life, people experience physical and emotional trauma. Communities are shattered. The scars of war last for generations. With them, this difficult period of the time, we worry. Let me say that we're also saddened by the tragedy that is taking place. Honestly speaking, I was thinking that, or my hope was to be here talking about the ending of the war and not the escalation. Looking at what is going on today, we find out that what happened is leading humanity to escalation, more bloodshed. Looking at the events, especially what happened last month, May, it changed the way Russia viewed the war. I'm talking in a situation whereby a bomb was sent where 21 people are killed, about 45 people wounded. It is a tragedy that have changed how Russia viewed the war. You know, after that event, Russia system of looking at the war or the approach of the conflict has changed. That kind of good guy approach the argument is using, because when you look at how the Russians feel after the attack, especially as the horror of those children crying, looking to be saved, It was a painful picture to look at. So that has completely changed the way Russia view this war. And what I'm trying to say is that we are about to see an escalation in the war. It will not be like before. Before it was how much that is too much for Russia. Now it's also how much that is too much for Russia to bear. Even when you talk about the pictures that happened, I mean the tragic event, Russia accused Ukraine of deliberately trying to murder children who are, residing in dormitory in Lugansk. And Russia has vowed to retaliate, and they made also sure that they really retaliate as they said. That was followed by the massive strike on Kyiv. Not only that massive Kyiv, they've given order to European and the ambassadors to leave Kyiv immediately. Although some of the Europeans has refused to leave, they say they are not going to leave. But for sure, the way Russians view this conflict has totally changed. When you come to Russia today, the mood in Russia is not like before. Before the Russians see Ukrainians, as their brothers and sisters, they still see them. But for them, being a proxy is to destroy Russia. With the recent event that happened in Lugansk, there is a complete change in the approach. So down the road now, we are going to see escalation. The letter that Zelensky wrote, I think this is not the time of letter. We passed that stage now. Okay. Because there's nobody that will tolerate what has happened. How children were killed, how many people were just murdered. It's a painful reminder of what it is. So it's a very difficult approach. Russians are not taking it very easy. It's a painful chapter, So they beg that they will retaliate. They are going on with it and they are going to retaliate, and it's going to be brutal. So this is what we are looking at, So letter or no letter, I think that letter is like playing to gallery. It has no meaning. It's kind of pretense. And every Dick and Harry knows that with the, such number of people, 21 people died, 45 seriously injured. If you can kill those people in Lugansk, which is a place you claim to be your country, then, which kind of message are you sending? Absolutely. Which means actually, either you decided that those people are not needed in those places that you are talking of land and not the people. So it's a very terrible signature to send to the world.
Okay, Professor. And of course, bringing us to the juncture of so many problematics and or questions being asked, where we see some sort of a juncture with the moral compacts, and of course and the hybrid level of the war, and also the power dynamics being involved in this. Coming back to you, Arnold Devely, we know that the killing of civilians, of course, a direct attack on the school, actually saw no, practical reaction from Western countries, and the United Nations Security Council somehow didn't actually appeal towards its handling of the situations. Here, we want to blend some sort of a balance between moral obligations, international law, and probably great power dynamics in terms of war and escalation, and how this now brings us to some sort of an era of international terrorism in the probably in the guise of probably fighting or retaliating the special military operation.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the gist of your question, but suffice it to say that the UN has again revealed itself completely obsolete, except for the shouting match, which we've seen already back in the during the years of the Syrian crisis, where a lot of debunking kept being attempted by the then permanent ambassador to the UN, Al-Jafari, whether it bore on the so-called chemical attacks, which we know now it's been admitted by the OCPW was completely made up. It's an issue of, I would say, something that has to be understood and interpreted within the larger context of a global schism. At the institutional level, there's a global schism. The UN is obsolete. It's a club. Albeit we saw this, that Germany was not able for the first time to get the votes required to sit on the Security Council as part of the 15-member rotation system. But by and large, the UN is completely powerless because the UN, for its financing, relies mostly on Western countries and some Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, which was not that long ago still a member of the Human Rights Council, which goes to show you the obscenity of the whole situation. But also on the media complex, because you mentioned, rightly so, that none of the main Western attacks on the Technical College on May 22nd. Well, obviously, no, they're not going to send anybody, and they're certainly not going to broach the issue online on air, for the simple reason that it is such a grave and horrendous attack on people who were sleeping in the dead of night, 39 drones, that this would automatically entail follow-up stories as to who manufactured those drones, how were those drones directed to their targets, and this would raise a lot of uncomfortable questions. So, of course, CNN is not going to do it. BBC is not going to do it. I understand Mr. Rosenberg was confronted at SPIF on the issue, and he said, we are so, I quote, solicited that, you know, we cannot be everywhere. You're a national media. You're getting your financing from the taxpayer. You, for years, if not decades, proclaimed yourself one of the most famous media in the world, and you cannot send a stringer or even get a stringer to report from the site. So obviously this is completely ludicrous on its face. But again, when you talk about the global hybrid nature of the conflict that we are discussing today, we have to take into account the institutional dimension, the media dimension, the public diplomacy aspect also. Interesting to see that Candace Owens' visit in St. Petersburg was left of it. I mean by that, those who now call the former MAGA, who were expecting certain policies to be implemented by Donald Trump, the woke Reich. I talk in that sense about the Ben Shapiro and Laura Loomers and Carl Levins of the world. And interestingly enough, since they have a beef now with Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others like them who are denouncing the stranglehold of the lobby, the Zionist lobby on American politics, they decided that having Candace Owens attending SPIF basically meant that anti-Semitism, I quote, is being generated in Russia. So you see how the narrative is being forged. They know they're losing a lot of influential voices because the reality cannot be escaped. I mean, just last week alone, we just learned that in the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act draft bill has been inserted. It's section 224, a provision which basically sees, and this was denounced by the Pentagon, not just Alex Jones. The Pentagon itself is very worried about this, which would see the American and Israeli military-industrial complex essentially merge into one. So you can see that it's all cracking at the seams, and they're trying to somehow draw a line, a fortification line around the Oval Office, because despite what President Putin might have said in St. Petersburg, I do believe that Donald Trump is not his own man. But that's a different issue here. But suffice it to say that, yes, it's all for nothing what's going on right now. Whether we talk about the Ukraine-Russian war, proxy war, the situation in the Persian Gulf, the situation in North Africa, because in Libya, for instance, we find pretty much the same actors trying to vie for influence, but also the Sahel, and it's all connected also with North Africa. We are seeing, yes, a situation where the old order is throwing everything they've got, essentially, but the kitchen sink, to preserve their positions.
Yes.
And the multipolar world is somewhat not exactly born yet. It's not really a security compact. It's exactly what's going on, how things are going to pan out. We're hearing that Iran is about to bail out from the NPT. This was on the heel of their announcing that they are withdrawing from negotiations, even though Trump says negotiations are ongoing. But we know that within 12 hours or within 2 hours of his saying that negotiations are ongoing, somebody in the Israeli government says that there's no way we're going to support any kind of deal. And we are now hearing that a third party might have provided Iran with the means to demonstrate that they do now possess strategic weapons. So it's difficult to know things, but you have to understand one thing is information, to the extent they once upon a time were part of intelligence services, they are somewhat still always in it. So it's basically all this is also part of the hybrid nature of the conflict. Disinformation is right, and I'm not talking about misinformation, but disinformation. That's the term that we always use in the Webster dictionary, and not the Joe Biden era newspeak. And it's ongoing as we speak. So it's important, I would say, to remain conservative and measured about what we may be hearing, and basically, double check, triple check, and look at the long-term trends, as opposed to news that seem to be coming out of the woodwork every single day these days.
Okay, dear Anota, I will stay with you. While looking at the political or geopolitical dimension of the war, we also want to zoom a bit on the economic dimension of it, because from the recent escalation, some pundits have always, revealed that one of the essence or the reasons for war is to probably reduce the population, and of course, or even kill the population and hunt the land. And this is why they say that this recent one purpose to push Russia into, retaliating, that could lead to a physical full-blown war. And we are looking at Russia being on the economic sanctions, and according to report, especially from the Russia, RT reported some a high level of employment rates in Russia, and an economy that is buoyant in spite of the economic sanctions. So let's try to see how the Western-backed strategies this time around wants to move from, you know, a failed economic sanction to some sort of a pressure by attacking civilians. We still revisit the attack on the dormitory, of course, to push Russia towards changing the tactics and making it more a guerrilla rather than some sort of a classical or systematic approach with the aim of protecting Russians in the Donbass. Arnold
Well,
Doubly.
yes, I guess your question is predicated on the notion that there's not going to be any attempt to seek peace with Russia. It's a long, drawn-out conflict, and make no mistake about it, the aim remains as it was stated decades ago, which is to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. It is deemed in imperial circles that it is almost a sin against God that such a small populated country would possess such natural resources. This bears to the mindset of the people who run the establishment in the West. And it would be foolish to assume that they have given up on those goals. Since Russia is also a presidential regime, the idea is to try to wear off the efficacy of Vladimir Putin's work. And when the time comes, and it will come sooner or later, make a move activating the fifth column that is in Russia as we speak to Putin's successor is, no matter how endorsed he was by the incumbent president, no matter how much he may yield in terms of influence in the areas where it matters the most, which is the security services and the army. There are powerful economic interests in Russia who are only waiting for one thing, is to resume going back to Monaco, recovering their yachts, and moving back to their penthouse in Manhattan so they can shop on Fifth Avenue. We have to be perfectly cognizant of that. And this is something that should not be somehow obfuscated. This being said, on the economic front, we know that's on the economic front, we know that's pretty much factual that there was something akin to a small slowdown, if not a quasi recession, early in the year. I'm not going to bore our viewers with the reasons behind it, but the president of the bank, the Russian central bank. It would seem that somehow, owing to circumstances, unforeseen circumstances, the treasury was depleted the last couple of months, thanks to the rise in the oil barrel, bearing on the crisis in the Persian Gulf. But suffice it to say, most of Russia's resources are being put into special military operation. That's a fact. And that means that the economy, the other part of the economy, obviously, is, adversely affected by this. What is now the analysis one should make is that Russians are supporting of their president. They know what it own dwellings, their own dachas. They do not develop other parts of the economy, and sometimes you need federal funding to do so. Over time, it might turn out to be a problem, yes. And I think this is what the West is banking on. As long as you have somebody like Putin in charge, this is something that will not be useful to the West. But what might happen once the successor comes in, that's a different ballgame.
Thank you so much, dear Arnold, for the insight, ladies and gentlemen. Just to note that if you are just tuning in, you're welcome to Global Insight, and we continue to analyze the stakes of the Ukraine war, not limiting it just to a confrontation between two countries, the Russian Federation and and Ukraine, but then looking at the extended course of it. With you, Christiane. Here, with the recent developments, we want to try to understand the new strategy and, of course, the agenda that is on the table pertaining the Ukraine crisis, and how proxy interest is changing its direction or course. And can we understand the strategy? Is it political, geopolitical, or largely economic? And how
Ukraine used terrorist attack, as Arno said, since 2022 and even before. I mean, even during the war in the Donbass, I mean, terrorist attacks have been used widely by the Ukrainian authorities, especially to eliminate leaders like Alexander Zakharchenko, like commanders like Givy. So it's not something new. We know since 2014 because Ukraine is losing the war and it's more and more visible. The thing is, the Ukrainian authorities are elaborating their military strategy not based on military objective but on marketing objective. So their aim is to make a maximum of buzz, to increase the anger inside the Russian population towards the patience of the authorities, and especially Vladimir Putin and people like Gerasimov or Belarus, of the Minister of Military Affairs. So, of course, the aim is purely marketing and media. So they make attacks which are weapons, and I will continue to destroy Russia for you. That's the aim. Because they cannot, make great performances on the front line, because now most of the soldiers they send on the front, it's people who have been falsely mobilized. So of course these people have not high motivation. They have been poorly trained, and the only point where Ukraine is still quite good is the use of drone, where she has this big drone unit, this drone army, which is led by this terrorist commander, which is call name is Madyar. And this Magyar was very proud that he attacked this Starobelsk college dormitory. He was proud of that. He boasted also about the fact that Ukraine attacked civilian vessels in the Black Sea, and and in the Baltic Sea. So they are not hiding at all. It's the aim is to make a maximum of advertising around this terrorist attack. That's really what they want, because that's the only way for Zelensky to continue to receive weapons and money, part of which is going in his pockets. So aim when it was obvious that they could not attain as leverage to blackmail Russia, give us back the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, or we will like blow up the Kursk one.
Yeah.
So once it was obvious it didn't work, they didn't get back to the Ukrainian territory. They sent soldiers to be killed in this fire pocket, just to say, oh, you see, we can still invade some Russian land. But they lost tens of thousands of soldiers in this useless operation. And that's the point. So we have now to understand that the more Ukraine will obviously lose on the battlefield, and it's more and more visible, despite what the Western media can claim that Ukraine is regaining territory or is winning and Russia is losing. I mean, these people are living really in an alternative reality.
Absolutely.
But despite that, is visible, and so the more Ukraine will lose on the battlefield, the more it will use these kind of strategies. So the more it will go to these very vile attacks against civilians, against buses, against schools, against children, to obtain the marketing effect that is needed to continue this war, to continue to perceive the weapon and the money, to continue this. That's the only point.
Absolutely. Just to note that recently, the Russian Federation actually celebrated marking, years of the war that led to deaths of thousands of people. And with the recent development in the country, we begin to ask if the Russian Federation can dash aside, diplomatic ways, or, non probably guerrilla aspect of the war to meet up the pressure that is coming from the other third party involved in the war. And in this juncture, coming back to you, Leonardo, we want to still look at great power dynamics and the situation of policy changes. Another tactics of such an escalation is to ensure that the stance of most countries may be solidified to ensure some sort of policy changes in respective nations. Here we are talking particularly about the stance of the European Union. Recently, the EU official visited Lithuania, Estonia, and then we saw a whole lot of interpretation regarding the Romania and other countries or around the area of influence. So we want to also understand how this is to an extent trying to probably maybe solidify some countries and delay proper elections in these European countries that will prohibit, pro-Russian nationals from taking power, or those that have a non-aligned position in the crisis happening. How do we understand this in line with the civilians and Western backed to pressure the Kremlin?
Well, the situation in each country of the European Union, of course, is very particular to that country. But if we are to look at a general trend of what is happening, it might be hard to classify. Perhaps we had a reversal if we're talking in favoring the interests of Russia within the European Union in the recent elections in Ukraine, in Hungary, forgive me, but also in Bulgaria, for example, that scenario represented a favorable turn towards Russian interests. We have a few players that can still manage to veto key important initiatives within not only the European Union, but also within and strategies that the EU promotes, but still in a slow manner, I would say, such as that defense initiative. So we have that situation which, despite a few reversals, the general picture that we can paint of the EU and its relation to Russia is quite the same. That, of course, depends on internal political processes within each country in the electoral cycles. But if we are to look at what perhaps is happening not only in that region but globally, is the strengthening what you would call the far right, correct? And that far right tends to be, of course, more aligned with Russian interests. And, for example, the far left also tends to align itself a little bit more when we're thinking of figures such as Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who in France might be quite popular, and that in that country in particular, we're going to have probably a direct confrontation between the far right and what they call the far left. Of course, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, for European parameters, is, and in other countries as well, you might say the same. So you have France perhaps as the main tipping point. Germany as well is in a situation where pro-Russian interests are promoted by the AfD, which is a nationalist party in Germany. Though still that party tends to have it's still one of the largest forces in the German Bundestag, but regionally it controls only a few areas, and nationally it doesn't have that much sway. So of course, the situation is dependent on that. You can't really predict an outcome for Russian interests in such places, precisely because they're so specific. So Russia is just dealing, and I noticed this when I visited the country, and I heard quite a few people saying, I don't know if Christelle is speaking from there, if we have any speakers that are in Russia currently, but what you constantly hear there is that whenever the sanctions were imposed, that was basically a civilizational decision made by Russia that now it was going to move itself towards the east, focusing more on partnerships with China, but not only that, in the BRICS countries. And it has been very successful in doing that. Right. Putin himself often refers to what he says is the global majority and the golden billion, which is, of course, Europe and the United States, Canada, and Japan, and 6, 7 billion people out there who are actually interested in promoting dialogues with Russia. In Brazil as well, you have that very much present. It hasn't imposed sanctions on Russia or anything of that sort, really. It hasn't provided military assistance, despite pressures that existed actually for that to happen. And it has behaved diplomatically quite in a very balanced way that is completely distinct from what you saw in Europe. And I really see a lot of potential in those efforts of integration, though, of course, these are still very incipient, and they're very much mechanisms under dispute as well. Whenever we're talking about, for example, BRICS, there's actually an internal conflict, military conflict within BRICS now, which is, of course, UAE and Iran, which has attacked the US bases in the UAE. So it might be a little bit of a turbulent time for us to think of promoting more integration within that bloc, but Russia nonetheless will seek to promote partnerships with such countries that it considers more reliable. And Latin America is seen in that regard, in that way. African countries, we see a lot of Russian presence in many countries in the Sahel region as well, which is, of course, a very strategic region, and also represents an interesting conflict between the interests of Western powers in such countries and, of course, the national interests of such countries. People often term those referred to as coups in those countries as movements of national liberation, even. So Russia is kind of molding its alliances in a very intelligent way to position itself quite close to such leaders in those countries. and extracting a lot of value from those relations. And it is important to see as well, and I always say this, and forgive me if I'm escaping from the scope of the question. BRICS as well is not a revolutionary platform. It's not going to simply become a new model of international relations based on some type of socialist idea of the world. It is not that really. It is just a question of aligning partners, countries that clearly have a lot of natural resources, and really strengthening their role in this global debate rather than I don't know, just creating some sort of great security initiative that's going to topple in a violent manner other countries. In Brazil, in particular, that is quite often emphasized, the fact that the diplomacy here doesn't see really BRICS as an antagonist to fora such as the G7 and the G20. They're seen quite in an integrated manner. And so we have to bear that in mind. And of course, Russia is seeking to exploit all the benefits of such relations. It has managed to do so. This idea that it is isolated is also kind of over for people. People are tired of seeing Russia out of the World Cup that we're about to have, of the Olympic Games. Like, it makes no sense when you ask a lot of people, oh, why are Russians playing with a uniform that has no, as if you could do that. So these are totally discredited, and Russia has managed to fortify relations where it actually matters. And people were very afraid. I was there in 2022 when it was about October, November of that year, and people were still very worried about the effects of the sanctions. You saw articles in international media saying that Russia, predicting somehow that Russia would collapse within weeks, within a couple months. Of course, that hasn't happened, but there was still this idea that Russia would have to redesign its relations globally so it wouldn't suffer as much. First of all, Russia can largely sustain itself to a very large extent, and it has preserved such relations where it matters, circumvented sanctions where it could do so. And when you go there, you don't really feel that impact of being in a sanctioned country. Anyone who has been in a sanctioned country knows kind of what that is like. You see, buildings kind of falling apart because of old age and old equipment, old in general, old cars on the streets. It tends to be a very ugly picture, but Russia hasn't done that because it has done quite a very sophisticated diplomatic work over the years. I don't believe in this idea of isolation, and really, the isolation is Donald
It's
Trump.
not actually
He is the
yielding
one
in
who's
a
isolating
multipolar
himself.
world. Absolutely, yeah. Like you, we're with you, Leonardo.
Yes, please. No, I was just about to finish that off, saying that
Okay.
Donald Trump is the one really putting himself in a corner right now because in this craze of attacking one day Iran, the day before Venezuela, now he's looking at Cuba, declaring everyone a terrorist in Latin America somehow. Even Brazil is now subject to this. The more he behaves like this, the more he pushes himself in a corner. And Europe is just in a little bit of a place of irrelevance and wrong ideas as well, where it seems to be banking on this idea of eternal conflict, pushing itself towards even more isolation. So I agree with the previous speakers who are really saying that this trend of integration within those countries is the spirit of the time, shall we say.
Of course, isolation in multipolar setting seems not to have, real relevance. And in that perspective, I come to you, Professor Richard. We're still looking at it from the human perspective. Professor Morris highlighted, of course, a very pertinent and human-centric points of the war. Why do we fight? Why? Who are we protecting? And then, if we should answer the question like protecting humanity, why then will the world see what is happening today that we can call it somehow weaponizing Ukraine against civilians? And how can this affect somehow people to people diplomacy in trying to reduce the consequences, which are very severe, of the war that is escalating or taking a more uncertain and complex direction at this juncture that we are talking?
Yeah. With all due respect, if I may, so I believe we are largely making the same point agreed here. This war cannot be understood solely through military or diplomatic lenses. It is also deeply connected to market interests and the role of corporate hegemonic media, as we often describe it here in Brazil. War generates enormous profits for certain sectors, while the dominant media frequently help shape narratives that legitimize escalation, define enemies, and narrow the space for alternative perspectives. Uh, this does not mean that the realities of war are not tragic. They certainly are. Rather, it means that we must also examine the economic and communicational structures that sustain prolonged conflicts. Uh, from my perspective, conflicts are fought not only with weapons, but also with narratives. Understand who benefits economically and politically from the continuation of war is just as important as understanding what happens on the battlefield itself. So I can remember and agree with Professor O'Colly's observations regarding the human suffering caused by war. Perspective of my own research and communication in African diaspora, many communities have been living under conditions of war for decades, not only in Ukraine, whether in the Brazilian ghettos, we named that favelas, in Ukraine too, of course, in Gaza, now in Iran, or in several regions of Africa, ordinary people bear the costs, while powerful economic interests often reap the benefits. What we frequently observe is that war becomes a profitable business. The winners are often the same actors: the military industrial complex, arms manufacturers, financial interests linked to conflict, and what I would call the permanent merchants of war. Meanwhile, the digital platforms and media ecosystems often package war as a continuous narrative for global solutions gain legitimacy. From my perspective, this is not only a geopolitical issue, but also a question about narratives and power. We must examine how certain actors contribute to building public perception that simplify complex realities in binary oppositions. In many Western media environments, Russia and countries that do not align with Euro-American strategic interests are often portrayed through highly reductionist framework. This does not mean that governments should be exempt from criticism, but it does mean that we should be attentive to how narratives are constructed and disseminated.
Thank you so much, Professor. Of course, the effects of war are very colossal, and of course, understanding the strategy and of course what it stands to probably attain becomes very complex, especially in the context of international relations. And with you, Professor Okoli, we want to understand how this is actually affecting the balance of power, not just across Europe, then across, in the world at large. We're looking at how the new dynamics will affect policy changes and of course relations between the Russian Federation and the global south, and particularly with the African continent, as decisions are being made in line, especially in line with foreign policy, based on the narratives or the present status quo of the war that has attracted global interest. So where do we place the theory of balance of power or our international relations in the context of the new dynamics of the Russian-Ukraine war?
Thank you for the question. Let me start by Nixon. So he was weak, sick. He left the stage by handing over power to Putin. When Putin came, he was able to pull the country together and put the country on the rail of development. I think that inability for the Western ally to disintegrate Russia formed the basis of hatred they have on Putin. Because if you know what the state of Russia in 1991, you can imagine a country as huge as Russia, where everything is owned by government, and suddenly that government disappeared overnight. Whatever you get is yours. If you are the director of a multinational hotel, you just gather some bandits, they will protect you. You will write the name and put your name. It went to the extent that a certain group of people went into the vault, and the gold, the communist gold, disappeared overnight. I just want to paint the picture. So in that chaotic mood, there was an attempt to disintegrate Russia, and it never happened. So that attempt to disintegrate Russia has never stopped. It is actually what is leading to this war. At the start of the war, they look at Russian economy as the size of economy of California. They believe with a massive comprehensive sanction, and the war, the proxy war through Ukraine, Russia will just disintegrate. They never know that Russian economy will withstand the onslaught. You can imagine going as far as to de-SWIFT a country. Inability of a country to receive money, transfer money, how bad it was. But Russia was able to withstand that. Why Russia withstood it is because of the nature of Russian economy. When you look at the nature, the structure of Russian economy, it is made up of energy and energy-intensive industries. That is the real economy. As Russian economy stood strong, because I'm here in Moscow, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda outright about how things are bad here. Things it's not as bad as they portrayed, in the media here. There is stability. You go to shops, you see product and everything. Their hope was that comprehensive sanction could bring a situation where you go to shop, you will not see any product, because not only the sanction sanction, but also comprehensive sanction. And also what helped Russia also is that Russia is a big economy. There are so many countries that depends on Russia for their welfare. I can tell you China depends almost 40% in their military industrial complex on Russia. There's a lot of Russian scientists working in China. India, also depends to some extent on Russia for their defense. So when push come to shove, those people either they didn't buy the sanction or they sabotage the sanction. That's why you see the sanction is not working. It's not having the needed effect they wanted it to have. And that is the situation we have here. But that notwithstanding, the danger is still there, like what happened on May 26 at the attack on Lugansk, where 21 people died, 45 people sustained
injuries,
sustained serious injuries. It is meant, to provoke Russia, and Russia actually got provoked. Because when you look at the situation here, the mood here is that they don't want that nice guy system of approach to this problem.
Yeah.
They want their government to take decisive action to end it. When you look at the pronouncement of somebody like Sergei Karganov, who's an advisor to the president, he even went as far as calling NATO and European expansion a cancer that has to be dealt with. Normally, you don't hear this type of language before.
Absolutely.
But now that this is taking place, I don't know, of late, Putin in his humanitarian approach to the war, instead of, attacking Kyiv, before that, he asked, the Western engineers, the Western servicemen who are participating in the war to leave.
Absolutely.
Ordinarily, it should not be so. But as having lived here, I've seen that Russian people are people of humanity. They believe in oneness of all human beings.
Absolutely.
And they believe in giving without taking. They believe in strong, helping the poor. That is their approach. They have capacity to take big pain. They can endure for a long time. But the problem is that there is a limit to human endurance. And there is a limit to what a human being can tolerate. The same thing applies to country. I think with what is happening, we are getting to that limit. The way the country is operating the war will definitely change. They know that Ukraine is just a proxy. It's just a tool.
Sure.
That if for example, supply, the war will stop the following day. So they are trying now, as Russia has said, it's not only Russia and Ukraine that are going to have the pains. They want also those countries that are supplying the arm to feel the pain. In other words, idea is on the table now for all those countries supplying the arm to be attacked. So we are going to a dangerous trend in the conflict with all the whole nuclear implications.
Thank you so much, Professor. And of course, it is imperative to know, all of you have noted already, that the hybrid tactics will always affect the public policy image of the country. And here the victim, according to reports and from the analysis that have been presented, is the Russian Federation in the crisis. And it brings us to this question with you, Leonardo. We are looking here still in line with understanding the tactics of war and how the actors maneuver everything, especially when it comes to appealing to humanity and forming a narrative that will kill some sort of a public image, both nationally and internationally of a country. And the case study here is Russia. Let's look at the intersection between the European division, the elite interest, that the collective West, and then manipulation, and how this brings about block competition, probably derailing the initial preamble of the concept of globalization or international relations, and how that is shifting in a multipolar context.
Well, in terms of communication, if I'm not mistaken in understanding the question and how that communication of this conflict is published globally, of course, we have an enormous prevalence of the narratives of the mainstream media. So it is highly likely that in our societies, particularly excluding Russia or countries that are more closely aligned to Russia, if we look at Brazil, if we look probably at countries in Africa or in Southeast Asia, what you have is perhaps due to this prevalence of this Western narrative, the population of such areas against the conflict and in a way blaming Russia. However, Russia has been very successful and has been very much engaged in not only publishing this narrative behind after the attempts that actually precede the conflict, even with Russian stations being banned in the United States, in Europe. So those channels are blocked in such countries. This is very hard there, of course. But whenever you escape those fears, you have a situation in Latin America, which is actually in the media landscape quite impressive. Not only in Brazil do we have Russian channels. I actually work as a stringer for a Russian news agency in Brazil, and we see presence as well in the country, their aims to solidify their presence in Brazil, but also when you look at channels such as RT in Spanish, this is actually one of the largest channels and even the largest in some countries in Latin America. For example, in Venezuela, it is amongst the top 3 channels most watched. So Russia has done quite a good job in actually having such bases here and attracting global journalists to events in Russia. I mentioned before that what you have is actually about 6, 7, 8 billion people that are not subject on a bombardment basis to Western media narratives. And this is really one of the areas that I'm most enthusiastic about. In Brazil 247, the media channel that I work for, we have many times been to Russia in those past few years to participate in such events, to engage in all sorts of debates, but not only limited to Russia. Going to China, going to African countries, seeking to establish partnerships over there, and always seeking to broaden that. And I really think this is one of the key efforts. Really, sometimes the role of media is overlooked or is put in on a second shelf, shall we say, when we talk about conflicts. But we all know of the importance of objective media, or if we cannot be there, at least to see the conflict with our own eyes, the job is perhaps to have both points of view, and that includes, of course, the Russian perspective published. Brazil has not really been subject to that amount of censorship, though still here, because of international sanctions and the way those are attached to the international banking systems, what you have is sometimes some situations where Russian companies or Russian people here are subjected to a little bit of a harsh treatment But yeah, my main point is to say that really this situation in the media landscape is changing. It is changing slowly, and it has colleagues who can collaborate with your analysis. That is very much a front that we developed, thinking that really this situation globally uh, is clearly changing, right? What we have is a rebalance. We all know of that in terms of global power. And the key conundrum that we face in that regard actually is the fact that, and perhaps this applies globally, such tech companies, the so-called big tech companies, they still have a major foothold, not only in Brazil, but whenever you access the news in perhaps African countries, in of course all over the Western countries. Even Russia itself is subjected to pressures from international platforms, and really this is one of the key areas of development if we're really looking to solidify our bloc, right, to prevent foreign interference. We know that such big tech platforms, they're controlled by those American billionaires, and they have clearly stated political interests, right? We can only think of Elon Musk when that topic comes to mind. Elon Musk is a character who has openly called for a coup d'etat in Bolivia, and we now see the whole tension surrounding Bolivia after, shall we call it, a neoliberal government was elected over there. The situation remains tense in that country. Latin America as a whole basically faces the same situation. It is only that Bolivia got to that boiling point that it exploded. But the situation in those countries of the region is basically the same. So, really, forceful action has to be taken really against such platforms because, of course, they're not going to adhere to the rules of the game, shall we call it that way, on their own intent. It is a hard effort, but it is one that definitely has to be made so we can even bolster that a sense of integration within the bloc, I believe.
We talk about the rules of the game, of course, and the stakeholders of the game. It is imperative that we also look at this question still in the same perspective with you, Christelle Niet. Still looking at the Western, the EU division. And when we're talking about the EU division, we're looking at the camp that stands against Russia, the camps that support Ukraine, and of course, the camp that actually stands against some sort of de-escalation, ladies and gentlemen. And then we're asking the question, Geda, division among the EU. We're looking at the interest of the collective West, that is the elite. And you highlighted that, Professor Okoli and Professor Santos, on who benefits from the war, and also the aspect of manipulation. While waiting for Christelle to rejoin, I think we can channel this question to Professor Okoli, trying to understand if diplomacy can actually help to bring all of these camps under one umbrella, and also reduce some sort of, or maybe prevent war coming from a diversity of front, as is the case in the Ukraine crisis.
Well, thank you for the question. Well, diplomacy is always the best approach to, get solution to such problem, this kind of problem. But the way things look like, it seems that, that diplomacy today is by the side. It seems that, the decision about this war in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine, will be decided in the battlefield. If you remember, Russia had made several attempts, to allow diplomacy to solve the problem, starting from Minsk 1, Minsk 2. And then when they have their soldiers in Bush, very close to Kiev, they had also a diplomatic approach whereby they had almost reached agreement with Turkey about the war. Definitely somebody somewhere came and told them there is no need of this diplomacy. They should continue fighting, that they are going to support them as long as it takes. This is the language we are hearing, and that's not the language of diplomacy.
Absolutely.
And Russia felt burnt so many times. If you look at, so it's very sad indeed, very, very, very sad indeed, that such thing could be happening at this point in time. Let's pray that, there is cool-headed people who will come and introduce diplomacy in the whole affairs and stop the war. If not, it will be a disaster if it's going to, I can tell you many people here in Russia are tired of the opinion the war should be decided in that battlefield. Because when you see what is happening in Moldova, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa and all these things, you find that no matter how this war is handled, if it's not handled well, it will be repeated in the future, And also, Ukraine, rushing to enter European Union, to NATO. Even if they don't enter NATO, they enter European Union, that will still be problem because European Union have the military aspect of military part, So this conflict, we're yet to see, many things ahead, Look at the pre-Baltic states, that are former Russian, today they're hyper, poking Russian right at their eyes under the umbrella of NATO, uninterrupted. So how long will Russia endure? Of late, you hear drone coming from that side towards the territory of Russia, So the world is
It is indeed. It is indeed at a crossroad and very complex. And of course, that is why we continue to ask this question of the role of diplomacy in it. Welcome back, Christianette. We are looking at, according to some pundit, Germany wants to actually kickstart I don't know if we should call it a third world war, because reports indicate that Germany has the highest, or the largest military and even financial support to Ukraine that stands as a battleground, especially in line with the crisis. So we are looking at how maybe you can compromise the various interests of the states to not deter or probably miss the trajectory or the objective of the special military operation that has been overwhelmed with the complex ideas of, protecting the collective West, that is corporations, looking at the power dynamics, of course, and of course division among the European Union countries, and how this is actually making it difficult for democracy to sustain, just like Professor Okoli highlighted.
So the problem is the West is unable to accept the defeat of Ukraine. It has been said many times by people like Ursula von der Leyen and others. They have linked the destiny of Ukraine to the destiny of the European Union and NATO. And so, of course, admit to Ukraine has failed, admit to that Ukraine did not win this war. For them, it's unacceptable. And that's why I'm very afraid of the situation now when we see all these countries preparing for some kind of war against Russia at the horizon of 2030. we see that Germany is heavily remilitarizing, which is a very bad thing. Every time Germany has increased its militarization, it ended with World War. So we have to be a bit worried about the situation now. They are not open to real diplomacy. When we hear Mrs. Kaya Kallas, we're saying that negotiations with Russia should include the fact that Russia should limit its military forces and so on. I mean, you understand that these people are living on another planet. I mean, you cannot ask to the winning side to reduce its military forces. You can impose that to the side which has lost, not the contrary. So the problem is also that the credibility of the European leaders as mediators or as negotiators has been completely shattered by what Angela Merkel and François Hollande have made. Which means the Minsk agreements they have signed, and they admitted after the launch of the special military operation that they have signed knowing perfectly that it will not be implemented, and that it was just a way to buy time for Ukraine to reinforce its armed forces to take back its territory by force and absolutely not by diplomacy.
Sure.
So the problem is there is a big problem of credibility, and it was pointed by Vladimir Putin during his discussion with foreign media representatives, where he said that out from people like Mr. Gerhard Schröder, who was always someone who was pragmatic, there are a lot of figures who try to present themselves are possible mediators who are not adequate on the European side, because he says these people are not neutral. They have very huge an agreement, a peace agreement. You need to have guarantees that these peace agreements will be implemented.
Yeah.
That you will not have to relaunch a new war in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And so who could be the guarantor of such agreements? That's also a big problem. And the third problem is that Volodymyr Zelensky is tied by all these neo-Nazis in Ukraine, which tries to flatter them to, make them some kind of friends by doing reanimation of Nazis collaborator like Andrei Melnik. But these people will never accept defeat. And if Zelensky signed a peace agreement, or even worse, a capitulation act, it's clear that these people will hunt Volodymyr Zelensky to kill him. And he's very well aware of that. So there is no Ukrainians, and especially these extremists side of the country, and they will never forget that, and they will never forgive him. And he knows that. So we have big issues on these 3 points, which make that I don't see a nearby diplomatic solution, unfortunately. And I think that this war will prolong for still some time, until Ukraine has no more men to sacrifice, or women, or even perhaps children, because we have seen what happens with the Nazi Germany with the Volkssturm. So everything is possible. But I hope it would be like this. But I'm pragmatic, and my pragmatism is telling me that unfortunately this war will continue, the suffering will continue. A lot of people will continue to die on both sides, unfortunately, because the Western sponsors of Ukraine have created all the conditions to avoid the possibility of an easy diplomatic solution.
Making it very problematic, and asking us, of course, what agency can be created by the Global South, the BRICS, and other organizations in line with the concept of multipolarity to also sustain in the sphere of international relations? And that question I'll be directing to you, Professor Richard, as we're culminating. In your perspective, from what we have discussed, and in line with the realities of the Ukraine crisis, and of course, what do you think the global South and even the Brits can adopt to be able to create a positive and meaningful space in international relations and diplomacy as far as interest and collaboration is concerned?
Look, that throughout the discussion, we have spoken about war, diplomacy, security, and geopolitical competition. But these are very important issues. However, I believe we must also ask a deeper question. What kind of world are we trying to build after this conflict? And others, who is Trump's interest? This conflict is very, very interesting in the United States. What strikes me most is that we are living through a profound transition in the international system. The institutional assumptions and power arrangements that shaped much of the 20th century are being questioned, while new actors and new centers of influence are emerging. This transition inevitably generates tensions and uncertainties, but it also creates opportunities to imagine a more balanced, representative, and democratic global order. What are we witnessing is not simply geopolitical conflict. We are witnessing the reconfiguration of the world order. New actors are emerging, new alliances are being formed, and societies that were historically treated as peripheral increasingly demanding a seat at the table of global decision making. From Africa to Latin America, passing to Asia, there is a growing aspiration for sovereignty, development, and strategic autonomy. For many countries of the global south, the central challenge is not choosing between competing powers. The challenge is securing development, technological advancement, social justice, and a meaningful voice in shaping the future of humanity. This is precisely where the new Pan-Africanism becomes relevant. The Pan-Africanism of the 21st century is not only a memory of liberation struggles, although the legacies of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Amilcar Cabral. This vision extends beyond the African continent itself. It includes the African diaspora and those committed to a more equitable international system. It's about dignity, development, reparative justice, and geopolitical agents. It is about creating alternatives to dependence and exclusion. I don't believe you are simply returning to Cold War, as you know. The 20th century 21st century is more complex. We are witnessing the rise of a multipolar world where countries such as China, India, Brazil, South Africa, even if Russia and many others are playing increasingly significant roles. The challenge is ensuring that the competition among major powers don't become permanent confrontation. The world needs mechanisms capable of managing difference while preserving cooperation on common challenges such as peace, climate change, public health, and sustainable development. In this context, Brazil has a unique responsibility as a nation deeply connected to Africa through the history, culture, and people, while maintaining dialogue with Europe, North America, Asia, and Latin America. Brazil is uniquely positioned to act as a bridge between different regions and perspectives. Our greatest contribution is not military power, it's diplomatic credibility. So I think in this moment we have to shape and construct good diplomatic credibility. Diplomatic is post away from Ukraine, Russia, and United States in Trump era. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor Richard, for that. Thank you. Just as we're culminating, just some probably few recommendations. I'll kick off with you, Leonardo. Like Professor Richard said, it is imperative to think about the world after the war. And I think that aligns very much with the philosophy of Globus to look at global transformation, learning from yesterday, contextualizing the realities of today, and seeing how probably tomorrow the future can be shaped from what has been happened in the world at this juncture. And on the table, the Ukraine crisis, of course, policies on paper from the European Union and other Western nations, of course, involved in the crisis. But then there's this quick question that we want to act as some sort of bringing forth recommendations to define the future after the war. Do you think Europe can sustain of course, after these probably pressure of the war, because interest is about seeing using the battlefield Ukraine to probably make vulnerable the Russian Federation. But now, what is the reality, the real stake on the ground, particularly in these countries? We saw protests in the United States where people were like, how can you take taxpayers' money you're sending to Ukraine, the Biden era? And also we're seeing in Germany how young people went out to the street. Of course, now the focus is on how to sponsor the Ukraine crisis. Do you think the Europe will be able to sustain a prolonged, test of its probably collaboration in line with the war?
Well, of course, we have to acknowledge that Europe is an economic powerhouse. Europe has developed industrial capacities. It doesn't have natural resources, however, and that is the main problem. Ever since this war started and Russian gas flows to Europe were interrupted or suffered from sabotage, in the case of the Nord Stream pipelines, this has caused a major impact in Europe's economy. Nothing to the level of collapse, but it has indeed damaged a few sectors, and it has actually pushed Europe to look at other partners in the global south. Latin America became a very focal region for European interests. I imagine the same world. So that is the key issue facing Europe. Where can it get its natural gas? Where can it get its oil? That keeps pressuring this economy to an extent that is more elevated than you see in many other places. In Brazil, for example, we have, despite this whole situation in the Middle East, managed to largely withstand the impact of the fluctuations in gas prices and things as such. Europe might not be in such a privileged economic position. So it is suffering from such impacts, but again, nothing to the level of collapse that many observers also try to predict. And as to whether or not it can withstand such pressure being applied to Russia, well, this is actually just beginning, right? Europe has just started revamping many of its industrial plants. As I mentioned previously, Volkswagen, Renault are now producing military equipment. Probably other industries will follow suit to that. And that, of course, becomes a whole military industrial complex in itself. And I predict that actually this, as the previous speakers were saying, will be prolonged in a logic that is basically, okay, who can withstand the more pressure? And we just have to look as well that despite, of course, not declaring so and not providing any formal military assistance to Russia, Russia has China on its side. And it is really a tussle between those two. And making a reflection about this, this is perhaps what configures most of the geopolitical conflicts of the time. We have on one side, and it is not 100% that is just kind of the structure behind what is happening right now, but it's basically a side that is supported by China against a side that is supported by the West, or the collective West, as Russian pundits and media like to say. So in a way, I would actually diverge from a previous speaker who said that the Cold War is not reviving. It is in a way involving the same players and involving the same power politics as it did in the past. So, as for the conflict itself, I also predict this continuation, unfortunately, and because, and that is the crucial factor, Zelensky doesn't have the cards. Let's remember what President Trump mentioned to Zelensky, kind of in a scolding manner in the White House at that occasion that we all remember. He doesn't have the cards anymore. He's just being used as a pawn for the interests of this newly developed military industrial complex in Europe. And the only solution to that really is some type of power change in Kiev. This has been speculated about in the past, but we have not seen any concrete movement indicating that Zelensky may be weakened. He has really turned that country into a dictatorship of sorts and solidified his power through martial law. So if there's not some sort of radical change in direction within Ukraine, that a conflict is going to exist. That I see as the only solution, actually, for this to stop and for Ukraine to actually come to the table in full terms without it being an influenced partner. I think that's basically where we're at. And just to tie it all up, referring to what we were talking in the beginning of the program, that letter from Zelensky actually doesn't touch upon the fact that he might be vouching for other interests, for the interests of those who want the war to continue. So that is the main sticking point. And until that is sorted out, there is no easy way out of this conflict, and just a continuation of this ground war of attrition, which is what we're seeing.
Quite complex indeed. And that statement from you, Professor Maurice Okoli, you were talking earlier on, and you highlighted the urgent role that the Russian Federation needs to play at this juncture to ensure that the pressure doesn't actually translate into some sort of internal strife. So we're looking at how Russia can opt its public policy dynamics within Russia to be able to probably sustain while navigating towards the objective of the special military operation.
Thank you for the question. Actually, this current problem between the West and Russia is one of the biggest foreign policy, agenda. The world is not as it used to be. There is China on the block now. China at 1970 has GDP of about $90 billion. Today, China is $8 trillion. What the West is producing, what made them great, China is producing it now and producing it cheaper. Take, for example, car industry. When you go to China, it seems that every family has a brand. And those cars are classy, technologically advanced. This applies to other products. So the West picking problem with Russia, thereby driving Russia into the hand of Chinese. We make China to accelerate in terms of, being number one in the world. Now they're getting cheap resources from Russia as well. So when you look at the whole thing, you find that it's a very big mistake from the West, because when you look at Russia like to stay with Europe, to be with Europe before they sell their resources, get a lot of money, bank a lot in the West, buy property, go there for holidays, spend a lot of money. They like it. They, by nature, they want to align with the West. But what happened that they are kicked at the teeth for doing that. Today, there is that move towards Asia, both resources and everything. As the last speaker said, the German economy that needed cheap Russian resources, gas to, is having problem. So also not only German economy, the whole economy in the West, now cost of electric energy, cost of fuel, cost of everything has gone high, So I don't know how they are going to manage that in the future. Whether, as far as I'm concerned, we have problems ahead, and the problem actually is going to be between China and America, because apart from dollar as a reserve currency, I don't think in few years or in 10 years or 15 years to come, America will hold any other thing as superpower, because those products that are producing that make them, China is doing it and is doing it efficiently. Sure. When you talk of, the production of, all this for electronic industry and all these things, China was lagging behind. They wanted to buy equipment from Belgium. They were denied. Today, Highway is producing, even, they've gotten some of their people from Taiwan, bring them into the system, and, so economically, they're pushing. So this is going to also create a bigger problem in the world as the world, move forward. Okay. When you talk of expansion, go to Africa and see what is happening. All the whole traditional industries Africans are known to, all of them closed down because China come with cheap. For example, in Africa, the major tire, is Dunlop and Michelin. Today, none of those factories is working. China is coming in with cheap tires, 3 times cheaper. It costs across all the product. China is also in mining sector, kind of, these are traditional areas where Westerners were making money, but they're being displaced by the China. Okay. And the West is busy having squabble with Russia. I don't think they know what is awaiting for them in the future. If they know, they would have made peace with Russia and end this so-called war and see how they could, revive their economy,
And of course,
hello?
Yes, Professor, just concluding, we are above time, please.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that, the world is not as before. So whatever, any country is doing, you should have in mind that there are alternatives. It's not as like before. China is around and is very strong, is growing.
Of course.
So how it will end, we don't know. It's just like equation with many unknowns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, it's an era of new alliances, shifting alliances, and of course, where old partners are reviewing their cooperation terms, like you highlighted. It's some sort of a problem of global policy, foreign policy dynamics at this juncture. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to thank a panel of experts this day for the, very insightful analysis on our topic, which of course highlighted some of the aspects of war, classical guerrilla, and of course hybrid warfare, which we are highly witnessing in today's world, and how this is actually shaping the tenets of international relations. I want to thank you all for your greater insight. Noted, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the program. While wishing you a blissful moment in the company of our transmissions, we wish that we continue to follow the events unfolding, not just across the context of the Russian-Ukraine war, but then looking at how we can contain the spiral effect through preparedness for the future. Thank you, and bye-bye.
This program was brought to you by Globus.